say, okay, here's your inheritance, here's your portion of the inheritance. And we know the story of the younger son, and he goes with the inheritance, and he spends it lavishly on different things, and he parties it all up, and has all these friends, and what happens? He blows it all, he loses his friends, he ends up having to work in a pigsty, eating pig's food, and he decides that, you know what, I have done wrong, and I'm going to go back and work as a servant for my father. And so what happens? He goes back home, and the father sees him in a distance, and a father as well esteemed as he is, he picks up his robes, which is not something you did at that time. He picks up his robes and he runs towards his son. He embraces him, and instead of scolding him, instead of saying, you know what, I told you so, you deserve this, he says, you know what, bring him the best robes, bring him, throw him the best party, bring him the best goat, and all this stuff. And so this is the story that I heard growing up, and this is the story of the prodigal son. What's the moral of the story? You know what, even if you go away from God, God always welcomes you home, and this is good. But one thing I didn't learn until really growing up and reading this for myself is that there's two parts to this story. But many times we are only told this. Many of the plays that we read, you guys probably don't read plays, but when you see plays, there's like different acts, Act 1 and Act 2. This is only the end of Act 1. And so I'm going to focus on Act 2, which starts with verse 25. Now many times, when we think about Jesus and we see these different parables that he tells, we kind of see Jesus as kind of like almost like this hippie, traveling guru that just walks around. It's like, blessed is the man who, and we think he's just walking around in random fields and people are just listening. But every time Jesus says a parable, every word that Jesus says is for a reason, and it's for a direct audience. And so actually, if you look at verses 1 and 2, what does it say? Of chapter 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near. If you want to put up verses 1 and 2, you can. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him. So that's one group. And then the other group is the Pharisees and the scribes grumble, saying, this man receives sinners and he eats with them. They're saying, this man claims to be, a worker of God, yet he dines and he eats and he talks to these sinners. And I believe that this parable of the prodigal son was not meant for the tax collectors and sinners. He said this. He said all three of these parables directed towards the Pharisees and the scribes. When we go to verse 25, what do we see? In case many of you guys maybe don't know the second part of the story, the older son comes home and he asks the servant what's going on. And the servant tells him, your younger brother has come back and your father has thrown him a party. And how does the older brother respond? He gets angry and he refuses to go into the party. And the father has to come out. And the father says, why won't you come in? He says, all these years, let me read it. It says,
meanwhile the older son was in the field, and when he heard the music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So the father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your order. Yet you never gave me a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.
Exactly. And so we see that he is angry. He refuses to go into the party, and the story kind of ends. The story kind of ends on this cliffhanger of you don't know whether or not he goes into the party or not. And the literal translation is, I have slaved for you. Not that I've obeyed you. I've literally slaved for you. And so, what is the older brother's heart? This is where we see his heart. That he doesn't care for the father either. He doesn't do all these things of obedience out of the father. He does all these things so that he will get his inheritance, so that he will get his reward. And so that's why I feel like this story should not be just the prodigal son. It's the story of two lost sons. There are two lost sons. Neither of the sons cared about their father. All they cared about was their inheritance. And what I see is, in our church, in my life, I will say this. You see younger brothers and you see older brothers. You see the younger brothers who choose to go away from God. And what happens when they're left with nothing, they come back to God and they find him, right? And this is where the tax collectors and sinners, they connected with the story. They saw that, man, even though I'm sinning, even though I'm living this lifestyle that's not according to what God wants, God still invites me in. But then there are so many so many older brothers in the church. Now, I'm not talking about East Dallas, I hope you guys don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about just the overall church. There's so many older brothers where, again, I was too. Well, we feel like because we go to Wednesday night meeting, we go to Saturday morning meeting, Saturday night meeting, Sunday morning, that we deserve to be blessed. That we deserve fancy cars, and we deserve all this, rather than the brother who is sinning. And we see that this is not the right mentality to have. That we see that we should, and let me ask you this story. When the younger brother went out, and he was doing this thing, whose responsibility was it to go after him? It should have been the older brother. The older brother should have went after the younger brother and brought him back home. But he didn't. He chose to just, you know what? You do your own thing, I'm going to do my thing. And many times in our church, we're older brothers and we have this mentality of, you know what, I'm just going to take care of myself, I'm going to look after my family, I'm going to go to all these meetings and God's going to bless me. And it's something that I've seen where I feel like I've seen my friends go astray. And I'm talking to myself a lot. This really struck me that I'm an older brother, where I saw my friends kind of stray off and go, and I did nothing to bring them back, to try and talk to them to bring them back. Going, when I was in my undergraduate at college, in my second year, me and a few others, we started this Bible study on campus, and it grew to be something that was really my life at UTA. I lived and breathed the Shift Bible study. And a lot of people were coming at one point. We had like 80, 90 people coming, and I was doing like the Thursday meetings, the Tuesday meetings, all this stuff. I wasn't doing what all my other friends were doing and going and doing this. And inside, I felt, you know what? I'm a really good Christian. You know what? Look at me. I'm not going and doing these things. I'm doing a Bible study on campus. Yet some of my friends, they would do better in school than me, or they would have certain things. They would have, better paying jobs than me. And I was like, you know what, God, this doesn't make sense. I don't do any of these things that they do. How come I'm not getting these blessings? And that's that older brother mentality that a lot of us tend to have. We don't do things, if you're an older brother, we don't do things based out of love for God. We do things because we just want the reward. And so I want to challenge some of you guys to question your intentions. Why are you doing the things that you're doing? Are you doing it truly out of love for God? You know what, God, it doesn't matter what my life may be. It doesn't matter if you bless me or not. Are you doing it out of a love for God, or are you doing it for the end result and for what your blessing will be? Because if you're doing it just for, you know what, I just want blessings, I just want the nice house, I just want to avoid going to hell, then you're living in a wrong way, in a way that I don't think is according to what Scripture, what Christ calls us to do. And so we see here, the father invites him to come into the party, invites the older son. The older son refuses because of his pride, because of his anger, he refuses to go in. And many times, that's what I feel like is going to happen to a lot of us, where if we get angry at God for our circumstances, God is inviting us into the party. God is saying, you know what, son, just come into the party. I have the celebration for you. The younger son is already inside, because you know what? The younger son realized his mistake. The younger son realized his mistake and went back to the father. And the father accepted him in, but the older brother refused to go in. And so God is calling us, church, God is calling us into that party. But a lot of us are going to be too stubborn and are going to be too angry at God for our situation. You know what, God, I've been struggling for the last month, and I'll be very honest with you guys. I've been struggling to, being back home. This is the first time I've been unemployed in 5 years. I've been working since high school, and I've been so angry. I'm like, God, again, I had a Bible study on campus. I graduated on time. I lead worship at church. How come I'm not finding a job? But my friend who's an atheist, he got a job right out of college. And I was really angry. I was like, man, what's going on, And I realize now that we don't deserve anything. All of the blessings that God has provided for us, we don't deserve it. And it's because of God's endless love for us and His provisions in our life that we are as blessed as we are. Children of God, let me just encourage you that whatever you do it out of your love for Christ. And right now, if you're realizing that you're not, if you realize that you're just doing it because you want God to bless you, I challenge you right now to just think about that and pray about it and see about changing that. See about, I don't know, I'm trying to put it into words. Let your love for God be the motivation for everything that you do.